Good day, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this Daily Maverick webinar. My name is Peter Fabricius. I'm a consultant to the Daily Maverick. We're talking today about a very important topic. We're going to examine the investigations both by the Zimbabwe Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee. At the time, it was chaired by Tendai Biti of the opposition, and a follow-up report which has taken account of that and added to it by the Sentry, which is a US-based anti-corruption watchdog. And it's about their deep investigations into Zimbabwe's Command Agriculture Program, launched in 2016, and the questionable way in which people close to the government benefited from that scheme. We would like to thank the Friedrich Naumann Foundation very much for support of this webinar. Today we have two very distinguished panelists to help us go into this report in depth. The first is Tendai Biti, who's been on both sides of government actually in Zimbabwe. He's now an opposition party leader, which he was in the beginning from 1999. But he spent 4 years in the government of national unity between 2009 and 2013, in fact, as finance minister, so he has a deep understanding of these matters. And as I mentioned earlier, he headed the Public Accounts Committee, which probed the Command Agriculture Program. Our other speaker, equally distinguished, is Nick Donovan. He was the Sentry's chief investigator for the report. He was previously campaign director at Global Witness, where he helped reveal military and Central Intelligence Organization ownership of the diamond companies in Marangi, Zimbabwe. He was also involved in Global Witness's investigation into the financing of the Rapid Support Forces militia in Sudan and Syrian Russian money laundering operations, helping the institute responsible for the Syrian chemical weapons program. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, Tendai, to kick off with 5 or 10 minutes and set the scene for what the command program was, why it was abused, and why we should be concerned. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and good evening to the viewers and listeners out there. So, Command Agriculture is a reference to a special form of agricultural finance that was created in the later stages, the last stages of the Mugabe regime. But the principal movers were in fact Emmerson Mnangagwa and the components in the security sector. The theory behind and the philosophy behind Command Agriculture was essentially that, look, given Zimbabwe's successive periods of food deficits, and given the fact that, ironically, Zimbabwe has had a land reform program, if the state were to commandeer farmers to produce a certain hectarage of maize in a region and pay for it, then Zimbabwe would not starve. So the whole idea was to try and force at least the farmers to devote 100,000 hectares of maize, 100 hectares of land to maize in a region, and that would guarantee self-sufficiency. But of course, just the name on its own, Command Agriculture, will tell you that it couldn't work and it was never going to work. But what has since emerged is that it has become a major vehicle of the looting of public resources from government, from the public sector, to ZANU-PF elites, to ZANU-PF itself, and to cronies and cartels around ZANU-PF. So it has become a form of asset stripping, a form of arbitrage, a form of rent seeking behavior, a magnified form of state capture. Now, I was fired before I could present my final report to Parliament as chair of the Public Accounts Committee. And even the report that they presented 2-3 weeks ago is actually my report, which they then edited and diluted. This is what we found. We found that the program commenced in 2016. In 2017, the Auditor General of Zimbabwe unearthed what she called in an audit report unallocated reserves in the sum of 2.7 billion US dollars. In 2018, she found unallocated reserves in the tune of 3.5 billion US dollars. Now, when we set as a Public Accounts Committee to interrogate this unallocated reserve, we actually found that the use of the term unallocated was misplaced. Unallocated reserve actually refers to money that was used outside Parliament without the approval of Parliament, beyond Parliament. In other words, a budget deficit of 2.7 billion US dollars and 3.5 billion dollars in 2018. We then followed this money. We then looked at this money, and we then established that the bulk of this money, the bulk of the 2.7 billion and the bulk of the 3.5 billion dollars in 2018, and for 2019, a period not covered by the work I did, the money actually spent, the unallocated reserve, is actually 6.8 billion US dollars. So here are the figures: 2.7 billion dollars 2017, 3.5 billion dollars 2018, and 3.5 billion dollars 2018, and 6.8 billion 2019. The audited statements of 2020 are almost out, and I'm looking forward to see what this figure will be. I'm quite sure that it will be around 10 billion US dollars. So when we began to interrogate, we then discovered that around $700 million had been used for command agriculture in 2017. And in 2018, the Minister of Finance had written to the Minister of Agriculture to say, accept this in your books. And the Minister of Agriculture wrote back and said, but look, how can we be accountable to a thing that we were not responsible as a line ministry for accounting and for expenditure? This is what then got us as a committee to understand that there was an elephant in the living room. And the elephant in the living room was command agriculture. And that this was a disaster, a parallel budget being operated outside a Parliament. The Zimbabwe's constitution says that every expenditure must be approved by Parliament. Every expenditure must be approved in the Consolidated Revenue Fund, which is controlled by Parliament. And the Minister of Finance must present a budget every year and an estimate of revenue and expenditure, which will be approved by Parliament. That's what that's what set the ball rolling. So in the process, we then discovered that millions and millions of dollars were paid to one Kudakwashe Tagirei. In fact, in his evidence before us, Sakunda admitted that between 2016 and 2018, they had received around 1.2 billion US dollars from command agriculture alone. From command agriculture. This was their own admission. We then got the figures. The figures then differed. I think in 2017, they got around 400 million. In 2018, they got around 600 million. But there were other companies as well. One of the companies called FSG, Fertilizer, a supply group, Valley Seeds, various little companies. But they're all part of cartels receiving millions and millions of US dollars from the government of Zimbabwe. So there are cartels that are, in the case of Sekunda, in the case of Kudata Gwirei, who controls Sekunda, he is also into fuel. He is also into mining. He is also into road construction. He is also into public transport. He's into everything. But here we are talking about command agriculture, and I restrict myself to command agriculture. The question that then arises is, if they were not being financed by the budget, how was command agriculture being financed? We then discovered that they were being financed through paper, through instruments called treasury bills. Now, in terms of the law, treasury bills are paper that is issued by the Minister of Finance, directing the treasury bill instructs the Reserve Bank to borrow money from the market. So the treasury bill is an IOU, is a check, it's a promissory note, it's a liquid document in legal language. So, but because we are a dollarized economy, when the Minister of Finance issues a treasury bill, it in fact has printed money, because we are not the Federal Reserve. We are not Mrs. Yellen, Janet, so we can't print the US dollar. But when you issue an IOU, you are in fact printing money. So we then discovered that they were issuing literally billions and billions of treasury bills to finance command agriculture, which were being issued to these cartels, in particular Secunda Holdings, in particular FSG, and then treasury bills given for what is known as the presidential input scheme. And Kwasi Tagwire was the main beneficiary of these treasury bills. So we then investigated the legality of these treasury bills. Strictly speaking, a treasury bill is paper. It's a prescribed asset. So it must have the date, it must have the coupon rate, in other words, what interest rate is there, it must have the duration and so forth, and its status. So the treasury bill is issued by the minister. We then discovered that what the minister was doing was simply authorizing the Reserve Bank governor to issue treasury bills, but the Reserve Bank doesn't have authority in terms of the Public Finance Management Act. So there are a number of omissions here. There are a number of breaches of Zimbabwean law. Number one, there is a breach of the constitution which requires all expenditure to be approved by Parliament. So everything expended on command agriculture is illegal. It is outside Zimbabwean law. Two, there is breach of the Public Finance Management Act, which requires the Minister of Finance to actually, he himself, issue treasury bills. In this case, it was the Reserve Bank that was issuing treasury bills. Number three, and most corrosively, the command agriculture finance became a parallel budget. So the government was now running through the back door an expansionary fiscal policy, deepening Zimbabwe's debt crisis, deepening Zimbabwe's macroeconomic disequilibrium, and also undermining the Zim dollar. They undermined the Zim dollar so much so that they had to discard the Zim dollar in February of 2019 because it had been undercut by this parallel fiat currency that they were creating in the form of treasury bills. Fourth is I'll wind up. Fourth is the issue of the public debt. The treasury bills by 2019 were now 11 billion US dollars. What it means is that the Zimbabwe's stock of domestic debt was now around 12 billion US dollars. And the sovereign debt, and for the first time in the history of Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe's domestic debt was now greater than Zimbabwe's foreign sovereign debt, which was around 8 billion US dollars. Now, the problem with deficit financing, as all of us here know, is that every government enters into domestic borrowing. Every government runs on deficits, most governments anyway, including the government of the United States. So the challenge is not about the deficit per se, it's how you finance this budget deficit. Now, if you finance this budget through criminal activities, through bypassing Parliament, you create disequilibrium like hyperinflation, like shortages, and that's what we saw in Zimbabwe. We saw the consequences of an overheated economy financed by a parallel economy in the form of treasury bills that were funneled in the economy. So we saw the return of hyperinflation. We saw the collapse of the US dollar, the collapse of the local currency. We saw shortages in supermarkets. So it was deja vu again. The things we had seen in 2007, 2008, which I tried to correct during my tenure as Minister of Finance.
Okay.
But the most pervasive thing about Command Agriculture is corruption. Because we then discovered that while we could prove, and this is where the cover-up now done by the report that was prepared after I'd been fired, this is where the greatest cover-up is. So we proved that billions of dollars have been paid to Kudata Gwirei, billions of dollars have been paid to Command Agriculture, but we did not receive a single voucher of what he actually had supplied, whether it's fertilizer, whether it's chemicals, whether it's seed maize, and so forth. So while we have got proof of money getting out, we don't have proof of a single item that he bought. But the Auditor General tells us what he bought. He bought vehicles. There have been divorce papers of elites saying this car was bought by Tagwirei. So trinkets have been used to finance, trinkets have been used, luxury lifestyles have been financed, school fees of elites have been paid through what is in fact called Command Agriculture. So in other words, the point I'm making is that a small amount of money has actually gone into agriculture per se.
Okay.
The huge amount of money stolen in the name of treasury bills is actually gone to finance political parties, to finance lifestyles, to finance expensive vehicles, which is why, despite huge amounts, billions of dollars being poured into Command Agriculture, Zimbabwe is still a net importer of food, and 50% of Zimbabweans have to be fed. As I'm talking to you right now, 7 million people have to be fed right now by the WFP, notwithstanding that billions of dollars have been put into Command Agriculture. So
thanks, Tenga. I'm going to interrupt you. I hope you don't mind, to ask Nick to go into some more detail, really, I think, about the way Tagwirei and Secunda managed to, make a lot of money out of these deals with the Reserve Bank, for example, giving them favorable exchange rates and so on. But take it further, please.
Yeah. So, thank you, Honourable Beattie. The main thing that I'm not going to talk about is about who receives all of effectively the free seed or free fertilizer. There was a World Bank and Government of Zimbabwe report which showed that only two-thirds of the money that was spent on seeds and fertilizer under the program only 1/3 was returned. So in effect, a lot of people are receiving free inputs to their businesses, and a lot of the recipients are very likely to be former members of the security forces. And the whole background to this time in Zimbabwe, it's a very politically tense time just before the downfall of Mugabe and just as the new president is settling in. So that's the background to all of this. And then the vehicle for delivering this program was an oil company, an oil trading company called Secunda, which is owned by someone who became a presidential advisor to President Mnangagwa, called Kudakwasho Tagwirei. And then what we've done is married the work that the Public Accounts Committee has done together with some of the leaked documents that we as a investigative NGO have received from the inner workings of Tagwirei's companies, because we received a stash of leaked emails. And then we've put that together with some leaked public financial material that gets released by the Zimbabwe Treasury every year with the budget. So we've put all those together to look at a couple of things. One is, how much did Secunda receive? And two, of that, was all of it legitimate? Was some of it the product of favourable decisions by the Reserve Bank? So we were in particular looking at the role of the Reserve Bank and the Treasury. So we've created a report and a spreadsheet detailing every Treasury bill and payment of cash to Secunda, partly based on the Public Accounts Committee evidence. And in addition to what was disclosed to the Public Accounts Committee, both before the period that they were looking at in 2016 and also in 2018, there were some other treasury bills, these IOUs that Honourable BT is talking about, being issued. There were 9 of them, which totaled 380 million extra that wasn't in the Public Accounts Committee evidence that was given to the committee by the Reserve Bank and the Treasury. And in total, with the cash and the extra treasury bills, the amount of money that Secunda received during that period of time was 1.28 billion. And then in their testimony to the committee, they say they spent $1 billion on seeds, fertilizer, other chemicals. So there's a surplus there of about 280 million. And we've got the spreadsheet, we've got links to every document, so you can sort of go into that and check that out yourselves if you'd like. And then we've looked at one particular Treasury bill, which was revealed partly by Honourable BT's questioning in the committee hearing. So there was one bill that was issued in January 2019, and the date becomes important, for 366 million. And the testimony from Secunda is that it was either cancelled or some of it was returned. And so they returned 204, or sometimes they've told us 202 million. So there was a 160 million Treasury bill that they were given in January 2019. And then in February 2019, Zimbabwe introduces something called Statutory Instrument 33, which basically changes a lot of assets and liabilities at a rate of 1-to-1 from the US dollar into the local Zimbabwean dollar. And this is really important because this affects a lot of the holders of other treasury bills. If you look at the schedules of domestic debt, i.e. treasury bills held by other entities, not Secunda, you can see that there is, if it's for 100, if it's for 10 million, it's 10 million US 1 year, it's 10 million US the next year, and then the year after the change is 10 million Zimbabwe dollars. So it's gone from a hard currency, the US dollar, into what became a very soft currency, i.e. it lost value in US dollar terms for these other holders of treasury bills. But this treasury bill, the 366 million one, which 200 million was returned, so this 160 million, it was protected. And they were given a favourable rate by the Reserve Bank. And we have leaked copies of Secunda's bank accounts and letters from one of Tagore's other companies called Landela Investments, which show this in detail. So we have one letter where they, in June 2019, that they are asking for the interbank rate. So by that time, the exchange rate is 1-to-5. So for example, instead they're asking for 21 million US, and what they should get is 21 million Zimbabwe dollars. But instead, they're asking for 5 times that, almost 100 million local Zimbabwe dollars. And the total value to Tagore's other company, Landela, of this amount of money that they're asking for was RTGS, so local Zim dollars, of 274 million. And at the date of that transaction, that extra money that they got was worth US dollar 49 million. And then we've got this other bank account transaction for Secunda, which shows in August that they received 500 million RTGS. And I've got to say, these are very large numbers. These are larger than 1% of Zimbabwe's GDP at the time in US dollar terms. And so he's asking for RTGS 500 million. He should have got about 50 million. So, sorry, the 500 million RTGS implies that they're asking for a transaction of 50 million US to be converted. They get an extra 450 million RTGS from using the interbank rate, the official bank rate, rather than the legal bank rate of 1-to-1, and that's worth 43 million. So they're getting an extra, if these calculations are right, extra 93 million protected in a way that other holders of treasury bills aren't protected. And then we've written to Secunda and put this to them, and they say, well, they were importing chemicals from abroad, and so the value needed to be transacted. And we've had some legal analysis done of this. And the law is pretty clear. It reads, for accounting and other purposes, all assets and liabilities that were immediately before the effective date valued and expressed in United States dollars, other than, it's got a couple of exceptions, shall be deemed to be valued in RTGS dollars at a rate of 1-to-1 with US dollars.
Okay.
So this Treasury bill was issued before the effective date. It was expressed in United States dollars. It was an asset and a liability, depending on who was holding it. There were a couple of exceptions. If the exceptions were if it was held in an FCA Nostro account, and it wasn't, or if it's a foreign loan or obligation that is due to be paid in foreign currency, and it wasn't that either. Because when we look at these letters, this Landella letter, what they're asking for the money for is not to buy chemicals, which is what they say. They're using the money to buy gold mines from the Zimbabwe parastatal, and to pay a military company called Penn East Mining, which is controlled by the military in Zimbabwe, for half of a platinum mine called Great Dyke Investments. And they're still getting the favourable interbank rate. So a Treasury bill which was issued to Secunda for the purposes of providing security to them as they borrowed money to buy chemicals and fertilizer, then gets transferred to another company called Landella. Landella then, instead of using it for fertilizer or chemicals or to boost food production, is then using it to buy, pay the military for half of a platinum mine.
Yeah.
So
Tell me, Nick, sorry,
in legal terms,
complete your thoughts, sorry.
wrong. So the last thing to say is that the whole program wasn't put out for open tender. And one of our key recommendations is that we should move in Zimbabwe to a form of open contracting where the contracts for public tenders are published, all of the annexes are published, all of the details and payments are published, and then all of the receipts. So the Public Accounts Committee asked for all of the receipts and never got them. These could be made public as well. And you can even have, as Slovakia does, a system where the whole contract isn't valid until it's published.
Okay.
And in that way, you just get the transparency and oversight of where the money's going and who's benefiting.
Thanks very much. Can I just ask, maybe Tenda, what about the, Nick mentioned that he doesn't want to go into the detail of who benefited from the supply contracts that Teguare handed out. But I mean, the farmers, apparently quite a lot of farmers who benefited from this program were very closely connected to ZANU-PF through, the Security and Intelligence Agency and so on. I don't know if you want to answer that, Tenda. Is that pertinent?
Yes, yeah. But let me just underscore the particular Treasury bill that Nick has been talking about. You see, up to now, nobody has been given an explanation as to why on the 20th of January 2019, a Treasury bill of US 360 was issued to Secunda. There is no explanation for the cause, the reason why that IOU was given out to Secunda.
Yeah.
The IMF has asked the government can't explain. I asked, as chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee, why that Treasury bill was given. There is no answer. Second, I told you that as of December 2018, Treasury bills that had been issued were around 11 billion US dollars, and the total stock of domestic debt was around $12 billion. So when on the 20th of February 2019, the government introduced this law that Nick was talking about, SI 33 of 2019, which had the effect of re-dollarizing the Zimbabwean economy, because it converted all assets whose value had been expressed in US dollars on a one-on-one to a new currency called the RTGS. So it means there was a massive haircut for if you were the holder of 1 billion US dollar Treasury bill, you woke up one morning on Saturday, the 21st of February, now holding 1 billion Zimbabwean dollars, which is not the same. They are not equivalent. So there was a lot of gnashing in teeth, serious haircut, serious devaluation of wages, of values in the Zimbabwean economy, serious devaluation of the Zimbabwean economy. Yet Kuda Kwashi Tagbire remains holding this Treasury bill of US 320 $360 million, which he then discounted at an official rate of 1:5. And the net effect is that when he discounted, let me just make this point, Nick. When he discounted this treasury bill now, it meant that there was now over 2 billion, 3 billion local currency now suddenly released into the system. There was an increase in broad money supply. And so when you increase broad money supply, you make the cost of money go up. So the Zimbabwean dollar collapsed by over 75% from a rate of about 1:5 to a rate of 1:25 in one day, forcing the Reserve Bank to actually shut even Secunda's accounts because the system was experienced the shock. And since then, the Zimbabwean dollar is never recovered. The frightening thing about this whole thing, about this whole levels of state capture, is that they are being done by the Minister of Finance. It is the Minister of Finance that is issuing those treasury bills. They are being done by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. So the same thing in Zimbabwe is that the Minister of Finance, which is the gatekeeper, the Reserve Bank, which is the gatekeeper, they are the gate crushers themselves. So you have a unique situation in Zimbabwe of the law being broken by the state itself. Yeah. And you know that only in December, the government of Zimbabwe assumed Reserve Bank debt of 3.5 billion US dollars without parliamentary scrutiny and so forth. Then the last point I want to make is that state assets, gold mines, the platinum mine you were talking about, there's Bindura nickel, there is Zim alloys. These are gold mines. These are mines that have been acquired by Secunda. But Secunda is acquiring these privately. So privatization is taking place. But Secunda is using public resources obtained from dubious treasury bills. So you've got privatization that is taking place, which not from private funds, but from public funds. So the grand waste, the grand theft of Zimbabwean assets that is taking place is just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
Thanks, Tender. There's a question here that Mike Davies wants to ask in our audience, and it's also one that I wanted to ask, and that is, how do you use this information now to bring criminal and civil legal action? What struck me, Tender, reading the account of your very tough engagement with Secunda and others in the Public Accounts Committee, is that ostensibly Zimbabwe has this very impressive kind of government structure as parliament. It has a Public Accounts Committee, and as you say, until you were evicted, which tells a story in itself from that position, it had an opposition leader as chairperson, and you exposed some very serious misbehavior. Let's just put it mildly. Where do we go from here in doing something about it?
It's a very important question. Look, the looting has become so primitive. The looting has become so primitive. And in the case of Kudata Gwirei and Secunda, it's actually naive. It's actually stupid. It's actually idiotic because you can't try to steal the whole country. So he's involved in the acquisition of US dollars on the rigged auction system. Kudakwashe Tabgire is the main beneficiary. He controls the entirety of the fuel industry in Zimbabwe. He controls command agriculture. He controls public contracts, particularly on road construction. He is now controlling 60% of the gold mines in Zimbabwe. He has now recently acquired 2 major banks. He has acquired the second largest asset insurance company in Zimbabwe after the old mutual called First Mutual Life. He now controls and owns Zimbabwe's sole gold refinery, Fidelity Printeries and Go. So he's now owning everything. But what the importance of the work being done by the Public Accounts Committee, the importance of the work being done by organizations such as Sentry, the Daily Maverick report, the OOCCIR report, is that the crimes are being documented. The crimes are being documented. Okay. And one day, someone is going to sit, an independent public prosecutor, an independent national prosecuting authority, they're going to sit and prosecute, and there'll be reversal of all these transactions. I was in Gweru, I was in Masvingo yesterday when Nelson Chamisa stood up and said, we're going to review all these contracts and anything down outside the law, anything down outside corruptly will be reversed. It has happened in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It has happened in the Central African Republic of Congo. It has happened in Nigeria. Zimbabwe will not be the first country to reverse proceeds of illicit financial flows, direct looting, direct extraction. So, which is why I don't understand Kudata Gwire, I don't understand Sekunda, because this thing will implode, and it's just a question of time.
I think he's operating, obviously, in a sense that he feels totally immune from any kind of prosecution. One of our audience, John Ribbons, asks, has the Zimbabwean state at any stage adopted any international convention or treaty in the nature of, say, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption or any derivation thereof? And I would also add, would that make a difference inside Zimbabwe? I don't know who wants to answer that. Maybe Tendai as well, or maybe you, Nick.
I believe that they are a signatory. There have been no real public prosecutions against elite figures who are currently aligned with the current government for corruption, and that's probably the litmus test of the seriousness. And the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission hasn't had a successful case yet. So I think they are a signatory to the International Convention, and prosecutions in theory are possible, but in practice disappear. We did two reports. We did one report on the offshore activities of Tagore, and he was setting up businesses in Mauritius. He was using South African directors as business partners or proxies, and controlling South African companies, amongst others, in order to diversify his oil trading business. And some people sent that to the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission. But to be honest, I wasn't surprised that they didn't bring up a case after that report. But in this particular case, I think maybe it's the Reserve Bank that is the target of the investigation. So why was Statutory Instrument 33 not followed in the case of this Treasury bill? What was the legal basis for that decision? Who made that decision? These are worthy questions to be asking by the police and by the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission in Zimbabwe, because it's clear that from the letters and emails that we have that Tagore controls this company called Landela. It's clear that there's no public policy justification in terms of buying foreign chemicals. They're doing domestic transactions to buy a platinum mine and paying the military. And the law is pretty clear. There were some exceptions to SI 33, and this Treasury bill doesn't fall into those exceptions. So I think there's a clearer case there for a prosecutor to take a close look at that particular decision.
And the starting point, Nick, is why was the Treasury bill issued anyway? Why was it issued? That question has never been answered. The IMF has asked that question. We asked that question as public accounts, committee. I'm sure you guys have asked. No one can answer. Because part of the problem is that after the coup of 2017, these Treasury bills were now being issued left, right, and center. I said in 2017, the unauthorized or unallocated reserve, to use the language of our Auditor General, was $2.7 billion. You'll be shocked to know that of that $2.7 billion US dollars, 1.5 billion was siphoned on one day, the 27th of December 2017. For Christ's sake, who still was on Christmas Day?
Tell me also, I know, and you know this, Nick, because it's in your report, that Sekunda's defense, or part of its defense, which obviously wasn't very adequate, judging by the report, was that they didn't get preferential treatment from the Reserve Bank because in those exchange rates at sort of market rate rather than legal rate, because they were doing it for everybody. Now, in a sense, that's not a very comforting answer for Zimbabwe, but is it not a defense for Sekunda that they were treated like everybody else, and in other words, the whole system seems to be pretty rotten?
Yeah. So to put Sekunda's point of view, which they said in the testimony and they said to us, is that they had this 366 million Treasury bill. They say it was issued for two purposes. One, in advance of the 2019-20 growing season. So it was security issued to them so they could go out and buy fertilizer and they would have this asset sitting with them. And then also to settle past debts to foreign suppliers. And they say as the structure moved away from them to the CBZ, where Tagore is also alleged to play a role, that they then returned or had cancelled part of that Treasury bill. And the 160 million that was remaining related to past payments to chemical suppliers. And then this same Treasury bill is then passed over to Landella, which is then using it to buy this platinum mine. So they've got this rationale, which is to pay foreign suppliers. And it's the same rationale which is for settling foreign loans and obligations, because it's deeply unfair if you've got a loan in US dollars and you're a Zimbabwean importer, and you suddenly had all of your accounts changed into RTGS, a softer currency, to still have to pay the money in US dollars because you've just got less money to pay it with. So what they did is created these exceptions to pay foreign loans and obligations. This is the exception set out in SI 33. And lots of these companies had to pay dividends to foreign owners or to pay foreign suppliers, and the Reserve Bank acted to protect them. Okay. And that's the rationale that Secunda are putting across. But to be honest, it doesn't hold up for these domestic transactions where they're getting a preferential rate to pay domestic entities like the military company or the Zimbabwe parastatal to get these gold mines.
So in other words, you're saying that maybe the other companies that they're referring to were in fact importing from internationally.
They had to make the Reserve Bank had to make huge changes and protect lots of companies from the effects of this introduction of the new currency. And what I think, in my personal opinion, Secunda are trying to claim that they fall into this scenario of paying foreign suppliers, and that's why this Treasury bill got treated specially. But the Treasury bill seems to have got treated especially for a wide range of purposes, not just paying foreign chemical suppliers.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, the other thing that's interesting to me in your report is that you discovered in the course of doing your investigation of Command Agriculture that, and Tindo has referred to this already, that a lot of Treasury bills were issued for all kinds of strange things. And one of them that intrigued me in particular, and perhaps you could explain, either of you really, is the one for the 266 double cab Isuzu pickups. Perhaps you could elaborate on that. I found that quite intriguing.
Yeah, well, look, what you'll find in the Auditor General's report, what you'll find in our report, and what you'll find in the Central report as well, is the huge amounts of money that were used to purchase vehicles, particularly luxury SUV vehicles, at unbelievable prices. One transaction, for instance, involved a company called Croco Motors. An SUV was going for 3 times, 4 times the value. Some of the vehicles were never delivered. Even up to now, they've not been delivered. So much so that when one of the top elites was involved in a divorce, and the wife was claiming vehicles, he pleaded that they were not his; they'd been bought by Command Agriculture, which illustrates the point that, which is confirmed by the World Bank, by the way, that less than 20% of the resources that are being siphoned in the name of Command Agriculture are actually being directed to Command Agriculture.
To farming.
The rest is now a paraphernalia of supporting the ZANU-PF election rigging machine, supporting lavish lifestyles, small houses, as we call them here, supporting loot, supporting bohemianism, acquisition of real estate. You can buy a house in Harare. The cost of real estate has shot up because you've got this huge pool of dirty money that is being laundered, stolen directly from treasury, and you cut across the length and breadth of the economy, whether it's fuel, whether it's electricity, whether it's contracts, whether it's privatization, whether it's public transport, ZUPCO, everything is dependent on corruption and corruption. And the key distinctive thing between Mugabe and Mnangagwa is that whereas Mugabe had some semblance, some pretense to the public good, with Emerson and this government, as reflected by the Central report and all these reports, The key question is the bottom line. How can I save the bottom line? Nothing else, nothing more. It's about the bottom line. It's
Buying
about
votes.
how do I feed in the pigsty, as it were.
Okay. But just to go back to those buckies, that was basically, it looked like in that case that was Mugabe trying to fend off the Mnangagwa faction just before he was ousted by buying a lot of vehicles for his for traditional chiefs, right, Nick?
Yeah, so somebody, and I can categorically say it wasn't Honourable Beattie, passed me some of the evidence that was submitted to the committee, and there were some Treasury bills which looked very like they were party political or factional spending.
Yeah.
And two in particular were interesting. One was in October the 13th, 2017, so in a very tense period where Mnangagwa is claimed as being poisoned, and just before he was sacked on November the 6th, that there were Treasury bills issued to buy 4x4 vehicles for all of the traditional chiefs. Very short notice.
Yeah.
For Mugabe to hand out, and that looked like in the run-up to the next upcoming election in 2018 that this was like party political spending. And then there were some very odd Treasury bills which we've published on our website, where they are making payments ostensibly to the military. Some of them, under the former Treasury Minister Patrick Chinamasa, looked pretty normal. So they're issuing it for ammunition or rations in June 2017, and it goes to the MOD account. And there's little handwritten scribbles in the corner of some of this material. And then on the same day that Mnangagwa gets sacked, on the 6th of November 2017, they issued 12 million for armoured vehicles, for rations, for ammunition for the military, but it gets paid to an account called CISM. And we don't know what it stands for. It might be related to something to do with the French acronym for International Military Sports Council. It might be something totally different. So in this case, it looks like the then Finance Minister Chombo issuing money in a very politically tense time, probably to the military, but maybe to some other entities. It's CISM, and it's a remaining mystery of what CISM stands for.
Thank you. Okay, now Thokozile.
Peter, can I just make this point as well? So, you know, these treasury bills require a PhD thesis. I hope some student can do that.
Yeah, they're quite complex. Yeah.
So one of the things that was happening, which I found most abhorrent, is that the minister will allow or authorize the issuance of a treasury bill. Let's say as he did in July of 2018. Of $12 million. $12 million. So there's actually a treasury bill of $12 million. A treasury bill is like a check. It's indivisible. But when the minister's letter goes to the Reserve Bank, there are now lots of writings now. That treasury bill is now broken down. So $2 million is meant to pay X, $1 million is meant to pay Y. But there's always a balance. So the $12 million, treasury bill, $4 million is used, but there is no description where the $8 million dollars go to. So when you unpack these treasury bills, you find that literally millions of dollars are not spent. The question is, where do they go legally? How do you split a check? You can't split a check. Yeah. It's an indivisible.
Yeah, it's all very obscure. Yeah.
So what Parliament has done, what all these reports have done, is to lay raw materials. But I hope some bright Zimbabwean students can actually do a PhD on this treasury bill, because
it sounds like it needs
grand hist and a grand theft. I said in South Africa when we launched our book with Greg and others that it is Zimbabwe that invented state capture. South Africa is just refining it, and these documents are proof of that.
Talking about South Africa, Tendai, Thokozile Padonko asked, I'm curious to know if the South African financial structure systems have facilitated or supported this. And more generally, I think there's quite a lot of curiosity out there in the audience about how does this affect the region? You know, as A.S. Smith asked, how do we contextualize the regional impact or implications of massive devaluation, public debt, treasury bill, Ponzi, looting in Zimbabwe, and how do SADC countries facilitate economic crimes? That's quite a large question, but clearly this thing spills beyond the borders.
Yeah. So to answer that question, I think South African capital has been complicit in the looting of Zimbabwe.
Okay.
Zimbabwe is losing close to $2 billion annually in illicit financial flows. And some of the big actors like Zimplats, like the Old Mutual, are actually in fact South African capital. Nick was talking about the number of South African companies that Tagwire, for instance, Secunda is actually acquired. So South African capital is actually implicit. I want to come, for instance, to tobacco. Over $1 billion worth of tobacco is being smuggled. Zimbabwean tobacco is being smuggled to South Africa. I know the South African government has got nothing to do with this. I know the South African government is trying to keep this, but the fact of the matter is that South African capital is concerned. Gold, for instance, if you talk to some gold experts, they will tell you that 70% of the gold now that is being refined on South African refinery, and by the way, gold has got a DNA, is actually Zimbabwean gold that is smuggled.
70%.
70%, as much as 70%.
Jeez.
They say, experts say, at least $1 billion worth of Zimbabwean gold is being refined in South Africa, annually. So South African capital is complicit in the looting of Zimbabwe, but not the South African government. But the issue is global. The issue is global, which is why we have been arguing that we need a UN convention against illicit financial flows. The current status quo is not working, and not just financial flows, resources as well, like diamonds, like chrome, like our ivory, for instance, which is being loaded in tons to places like China.
Okay.
So Africa and Zimbabwe is being ripped and raped. Cecil John Rhodes is still alive, but he's manifesting himself in different sophisticated portals. Secunda is one of them. The Old Mutual is another. Impala is another.
Did you see any evidence, Nick, of wider regional implications, South Africa and so on?
We definitely saw the involvement of South African individuals. There's about half a dozen of them who were involved in helping Kudu-Kwashe Tagore set up companies in South Africa, Mauritius, and Zimbabwe. Mm-hmm. And they then set up structures to have a Mauritius company owning the Zimbabwean companies, and then have the ownership of the beneficial ownership of the Mauritius company, which was controlled by Tagore, to be obscured via the Cayman Islands. So you have the offshore world helping to set up structures which aren't having Tagore as a director or as a shareholder, but as the controller of a trust, or there's a principal agent contract that is separate to the beneficial ownership disclosures. And they're setting up all of these things because they want to be able to answer the bank's questions about who owns this company and where is this money coming from. And we see a South African lawyer, South African individuals involved in establishing these entities. And so whether there are sort of crimes going on that we can really pinpoint with Tagore, I haven't seen all of those except in the stash of documents that we had. We didn't have the sort of brown paper bag corruption that we could point to. But what we saw was a big attempt to obscure identity and obscure ownership with the use of Mauritius and South African individuals.
Tax havens. Yeah. Okay, Fani van Rensburg asked, and I think this might have to be the last question before I ask the two panelists to summarize. Is this whole Command Agriculture project and the way it's been abused not a copy of what ZANU-PF government did with the Cotton Project in early 2000? And I guess, Chinda, you might be best placed to answer that. Does it ring a bell?
This is unprecedented. This is we have had scandals, including the
Oh, we've lost you. You haven't muted yourself. Tenda? Okay, I'm going to have to drop you. Do you know of? I guess this requires
the office of the president.
So just repeat that. We missed you. We lost you a bit there, Tenda.
I said this is unprecedented. Command Agriculture is unprecedented because here you are talking about the involvement of huge amounts of dollars. Billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Our annual budget is around. Our annual budget on average is around 3.5 billion. So if in 1 year 3.5 billion is spent over and above the budget, in other words, Command Agriculture is 100% of the approved budget by Parliament. So you're talking of huge figures. Then you're also talking about a huge scope of individuals inside government, inside the security sector, starting with the office of the president. Thirdly, you are also talking of the direct criminal activities of the key offices that are supposed to be gatekeeping, in particular, the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry and the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe. You're talking about, if you read the Public Accounts Committee report, the emasculation of the Grain Marketing Board, the emasculation of the Ministry of Finance, the emasculation of the government's own public finance management system, the emasculation of the Reserve Bank itself. So this is total capture, total collapse. Yeah, so this is a wide scale. This is wide scale. This is unprecedented.
I think that probably constitutes a good summary of your position, Tenda. Could I ask you, Nick, to give us a brief wrap of how we may get back to Tenda if we've got a moment.
Yeah. So there's a question which is, do you think an independent commission will help in curbing corruption in Zimbabwe? I think there's a specific case for investigation of the decision to give this particularly Treasury bill, this preferential treatment. And previously, in a very sort of naive, utopian way, I've made a recommendation for an independent commission with commissioners from SADC or African countries, judges, to look at the issues around so-called state capture, just to investigate whether there are sufficient grounds, because a lot of this stuff might not be illegal, but it's evidence of such high-level access that the only way you can understand all of these decisions to give, without public and open tendering processes, a group of favoured companies, public contracts, you might need a commission to unwind it all. Now, that's quite naive. And so in the meantime, what banks need to do is to take extreme care in financing these activities while making the balance not to de-risk Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe really needs not to be de-risked. We need ordinary businesses, ordinary citizens to be able to access financial services. We need to get that right. And then the other quite utopian at the moment recommendation is a lot of this could be solved through more transparency and openness. You could have an open contracting system. You can have a beneficial ownership register where the true owners of companies are declared. And then Zimbabwean citizens and journalists can look at contracts, can look at companies and find out who's behind them. And then if there's nothing wrong, if these companies and these politicians aren't doing anything wrong, then there's nothing to hide from a bit of transparency.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask one more question of you, Tendai? The report, Nick's report, suggests that given the fact that the Reserve Bank is so deeply complicit in this whole scheme, maybe the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission should be the one to investigate. Do you see that as politically feasible, knowing how the system works?
It will never happen. But because the central bank, Zimbabwe Central Bank, has been at the epicenter of every crisis that we have had since independent economic crisis. We don't need it. After all, the main currency, the US dollar, which we don't print. So we actually need a currency board. Zimbabwe doesn't need a central bank because the central bank has been at the epicenter of corruption and disequilibrium. But finally, if you read all these reports, and the reports of the Public Accounts Committee, if you take into account that right now before Parliament, there's a bill, government is seeking condonation of spending outside Parliament, 10.6 billion US dollars. You actually realize that the reason why we had a coup in 2017 was actually to cover up corruption, because Mugabe was getting closer to realizing that he was being given pennies when big boys were stealing millions. So corruption has become Zimbabwe's biggest existential threat to its democracy.
Okay, I want to thank you both very much for excellent contributions, very enlightening to me, and I hope to everybody else. This has really been very great revelation, I believe, to our listeners, to our audience. And I also want to thank the Daily Maverick, obviously, but also thank again the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much to everybody, and goodbye.
Thank you.